Now, greetings to the north, the south, the east and the west, I do say. Touching down in superfine style. Yes, indeed. This is, of course, the world famous OPAL frequencies in service. Now, let us suppose for a few moments that 100 people listened to the first of these 3 commentaries to do with the blueprint. Now, if a person has an understanding of the 5 powers of the soul, they would immediately recognize how the human being is made up of 5 integrated powers utilized from the in to the out and from the out to the in as the senses, that being the ability to hear, taste, touch, smell, and of course see. These are the 5 senses. Now, the 5 senses are able to draw from 7 separate levels of experience. Now, this is something that is understood as a universal principle which is fixed in the human being. What that means is the human can't change it. Anywhere you go in the world, what's about to be said applies or has to apply to that human being. And that is, they can only perceive life through the 5 senses via a spectrum, or governed by a spectrum of 7. Now, if you look at, for instance, sight, there's a spectrum of light. If you look at taste, there's a spectrum of taste from acid to alkaline. If you take, for instance, smell, there are really only 2 types of smell. Smells that are alive and smells that are dead. In touch, pleasure and pain. It's not something that people actually think about, but they really do, because nobody wants to smell something that's rotting. You know, if they smell it, they move away from it. So nobody wants to be close to something that's going to maybe burn them. Remember, there's 2 types of burning. There's burning to do with the sun, and there's burning to do with the ice, because they both can burn. And the interesting thing about that is when the sun burns something, it's quite quick. There's an ignition. The whole thing is consumed from the outside inwards. This is how high consumption takes place. It's a living fire. But when ice burns something, like for instance, if a person's caught out and they get caught out in a really extreme cold, and their extremities start to freeze, like the hands or the feet, well, when they get home, the feet are still there moving, but over the period of days, the feet starts to atrophy, the blood flow stops, and the foot drops off or has to be amputated. So it's a slow, malignant process. You see, it's much more magnetic, a lot slower. That's a different type of consumption, and that consumption takes place from the inside out. The consumption by fire takes place from the outside in. That's the difference. So really, you know, I'm digressing, but the point is, and the important point at that, is that a human being, no matter whether you go to the north, the south, the east, or the west, is governed by an experience that has 5 basic powers to it. The white, the red, the blue, the yellow, and the green. The thinking, the ability to move and habit, instinct, emotion, and of course then sexual. These are the 5 basic powers, with an additional 6 and 7 that come in after puberty. And that is the higher emotion and the higher sexual. So there's 7. And when those 7 kick in, there's a further 2 to do with natures, that being gold and silver. or conductivity and definition. This is a higher expression of human life, conductivity and definition. But the point is, no matter what you're looking at within the human being, whether it's the 5 powers of the soul or what the 5 powers of the soul can connect to, what you'll notice is it's drawn from 7, from a spectrum of 7. And once we start speaking about spectrums, we're speaking about octaves. So there could be a low octave, a medium octave, and a high octave as an example. And that would be the law of 3. So the first fundamental thing to understand, once again, no matter where you go in the world, no matter what religion you believe in, no matter what belief system you adhere to, you can't get past the fact that every human in the world, if they're functioning naturally, has 5 senses. Yes, they're blind, but the eyes and the potential was there. The 5 senses then draw from the planetary government, which is an expression of 7, because everything expresses itself in the nature of 7. And somehow, this experience then must have a high experience or a low experience, where high is fine and low is coarse. High is regenerative, low is degenerative. Now, it doesn't matter who a person claims to be, they just can't get past that unless they're living on some other planet as an alien, because that's how it works here. The human is a 5 thing with an additional 4 to be 1. But the basic skills, or what's called the standard equipment of a human being, that's the first soul. That's the first soul. That soul is placed in the human being because of its presence. And its presence then causes the outer manifestation, which is the physical body, slowed down, like the energy slowed down, then defines itself as the physical body. Now, the question is, inquiring minds are going to be asking then, well, where does the soul come from? Well, the soul comes from the spirit. The essence of life is the spirit. The presence of life is the soul. And the radiation of life is the physical body, the physical attributes, the radiation. The heat that comes off a person, that's their radiation. But radiation then goes into more subtle terms because of the refinement of the instinct. It picks up on finer levels of radiation. But essentially, no matter where we go with this, the important thing to put in place that this is the type of fact that is what's called irrevocable. It's immovable. You cannot distract anyone away from this fact that every human being is governed by a 7-fold experience. They're governed by this fact, no matter where you go. It doesn't matter if you're looking at the eyes, the nose, everything in life to do with the senses can be measured or is measured using a system that can easily be identified as being a scale from a high to a low level. If it's sound, you got treble and you got bass. I mean, it's just like, let's not waste our time trying in any way whatsoever to deflect or distract our realization that this is somehow a reality in our lives as we listen to this, that we're governed by a 7-fold spectrum which almost filters our experience and identifies where we are within the spectrum itself. And of course, your connection then reflects your attitude to life. Not to people, but to life. Where a person's connection is actually will reflect their attitude towards their own life. Because they're not perceiving the same things as other people. They're doing things without perceiving the consequences. This kind of thing. Now, this is a very important point, and the reason why it's being made now and not in the first of this series of 3 is because now, for those people, they've won the ability to actually understand what that means. They've listened to 1, they've listened to 2, perhaps even numerous times, and then they've come on to 3, and congratulations to those people listening within the present company, because you've won the right, you've won the ownership to be attended with the type of understanding other people who didn't enjoy this journey have robbed themselves of. If you've listened to 1, more than 1 or 2 times, really got what's being said there, had patience, okay, it's strange, I've never heard this before, but just stuck with it. You went to episode 2, from blue to red, and suddenly you're starting to see a little bit of a connection, reasons to why this is this and this and this, you know, and the more a person does this, the clearer it's going to become. But congratulations to those within the present company who are ahead of what's being said. They've already caught the drift of what's being, they can already dig what's being mooted to. You know what I mean? Because they've made the connection, right? Congratulations to those within the present company, along with all of us companions along the way of this, but congratulations in particular to those people who caught the drift, and they've caught it now, because they've made the connection. But to continue then, irrevocable fact. Now, the interesting thing about irrevocable fact, it suggests there's got to be irrevocable fact connected to irrevocable reason. Reason's red, principle's blue, and fact then is white. The white of it, the facts of it. The clinical, as in white, clean, clinical, complete, holding everything within it, white, not a colour, but the cause of colour. So a real fact, a universal fact, is clinical because you just can't mess with it. And when a person says that, listen, there's no human in the world that does not perceive the world through the spectrum of 7 and the highs and lows and variables that come as a result of spectrum, such as low, middle and high, or bass, medium and treble. If that's true about the ears, it must be true about all of the other senses, which of course it is. The rainbow's another example of that. Acidity and alkalinity is another example of that. The list goes on, you know what I mean? But the point is this, look, don't mess with the fact that if that's true, has a person considered where their experience is as they live their life? Or do they just let it happen? That's the point. Because remember, nothing can stay the same. Everything's taken on a direction. Nothing stays the same. Nothing's static in life. So if a person doesn't know where they're heading because they haven't thought about it, they're going to end up somewhere else. But to continue then, so look, once we've established this fact, the reason behind why that's so important is because if everyone in this world has the option to choose from a spectrum of 7 types of influence through the 5 senses, the reason why that's necessary is because unless a person is dealing in life connected to at least, the very least, 3, 2 and 1, they're never going to access the 6th and the 7th type of power of the soul, which is the higher level of emotion and the higher sexuality. Now if you think about it, how is a person supposed to be able to connect to 6 and 7 if the highest they can go is 4? The highest they're unconsciously aware of is 4. How are they supposed to connect to 6 and 7? You can't. You can't. And how's a person supposed to connect to 7 if the highest they go is 5? They just can't. It's impossible. It's impossible. Because a person has 3 parts to their mind, to their psychology, to their brain, to the connective range of their actual life and the vine of life that they're existing in and that exists within them. So if a person's connected to the vine of their life and the highest they can go is 5, their spirit has reconnected itself to the vine to the level of 5, how on earth Can they disconnect from 7 if they're connected to it? They can't. You just can't do it. There's got to be something about human life that's so unique and so incredibly special because it can actually think for itself. There is a potential for the human to think for itself. It's the only thing in the planet, in this universe that can. It's the thread or the nervous system. Like if you imagine a nervous system running from the brain right through to the skin, well then the human being is a neuron or in that spine. It's very, very far away from the brain, but it's connected to the brain. But the strange thing about the human being is that it can raise the frequency of itself in terms of its awareness so that it moves from perceiving things on the outside to actually conceiving things on the inside, above and beyond the brain itself. It can actually move up itself, graduate or sublimate or translate itself all the way up from the exterior parts of the skin, all the way up through the hand or wherever it's located into the central nervous system. And this is by analogy, not literally, but by analogy. The central nervous system of God. This is something that was discussed in 2014. The central nervous system of God. In that the human being lives on the ray of creation, which is like a spine, in the central nervous system of the Creator. And so what it's suggesting is the human being is connected to the energy that the Creator is connected to, but it's being picked up right now in the physical body of God. We're living in the physical body of God. This is something that was spoken about in 2014. And so the only thing within the bodies of the bodies of the bodies of any, the only thing in the bodies, whatever body you're talking about, that can actually change, sublimate, in other words, go from 60 hertz to 90 hertz, or from 90 hertz to 30 hertz in a higher octave. Octave to octave, or from hertz to hertz, moving from a higher octave of hertz into an even higher octave of hertz. The only level of cell within the body of God, whether it's part of the nervous system right at the tip of the skin, or the highest vibration or frequency of cell within the brain itself. No matter what we're speaking about, the human being is not connected to the cell. The human being is a consciousness connected to the energy running through those cells. So when it gets right to the top of the highest frequency of God's brain, it transmutes again and becomes whatever it is that's quickening the brain itself. Because the human being isn't physical. The human being is the conductivity within the physical. So there's no limit. There's conceivably there. This is why eternity is unimaginable. It can't be described. You can only give analogy to it. And the best analogy to give is, if you think about the physical body, and you think about how when you touch something or see something, it moves through the physical body, goes into the nervous system, up into the brain, and gets translated. And then something occult happens, which is called experience. That's occult. That's not taking place in the physical body. That's occult. Now, when this experience takes place, it then translates itself back down through the physical body. That's called emotion. Now, why is emotion first? Emotion has to be first because emotion is the connective property within the human being. Emotions is how the human being connects. And remember, emotion then must have 7 levels, from low emotion to high emotion. But the highest emotion is not at 4, but at 7. And the highest sexuality a person can have is not at 5, but at 6. So this is why, if we think about the law of 3, and you're speaking about 7, it's important for the human being to be connected to at least the first, the second, and the third. Or, when speaking about the 5 powers of the soul, the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th, because they correspond as both being high. And if a person understands what's being presented now, they will see it's absolutely impossible for a person who is living at 7, 6, and 5 to have any connection whatsoever to an experience of life, the consequent intelligence and sensitivity, but most importantly, the essential connective value of what can attend a particular refined and developed individual, whether that individual is a man or a woman. It doesn't matter. Because at that point, I over I equals I. So, for those that have the eyes to see, if someone presents themselves, and this is going to happen more and more, it's happening in the world at incredibly exponential rates, from mega churches to YouTube messiahs. But the problem is not the challenge, the problem, something that can't be changed. This cannot be changed. What's taking place is irrevocable. Just like if a person gets an apple or a piece of fruit, puts it on their kitchen counter, there's certain things about that orange, as an example, that will change over time. And what takes place is the life of the orange starts to withdraw from 7, 6, and 5, the external part of the orange, first. And then it retreats even further into 5, 4, and 3, and by this time is rotting on the outside, it's dead. But then the curious thing is, when the inside of the orange is inspected, the curious thing is, there's a seed in there, or 1 or 2 seeds, and they've sprouted. They're actually alive. They've sprouted. At the same time that the skin was rotting, the seed was sprouting in the same piece of fruit. So what does this tell you? What does this tell you? For those that have the eyes to see, look, especially for 1 or 2 of the present company who, it can't be certain, but they may have been around right from the very beginning. And, you know, what they're able to see now, what they're able to conceive now, and what they're able to perceive now about what's being said is going to protect them in the future, because they're going to know that if anything in this particular realm of our experience, which is a planetary realm of experience, physical realm of experience, suggests that it is God, it's lying, because it's impossible for the unseen to appear in the seen in any way, shape or form. It's impossible for 1, 2 and 3 to appear in 7, 6 and 5. It's impossible. It's impossible for it to be day and night at the same time. They're separate. One is living above the other. One gives rise to the other. So when speaking now about the experience of a human being, and I use that term loosely, human being, but when speaking about the experience of a human being in terms of the logistics of reasoning, this is now another horribly irrevocable principled reason as to why a person is a blasphemer. Now, this is a term seldom used, but a blasphemer is a person who misrepresents universal law. That's a blasphemer. It's the worst type of lie, is to blaspheme. And for someone to say or try to explain that whilst disconnected from 1, 2 and 3, which could also be esoterically attributed to the level of the spirit. 1, 2, and 3. Custodial. And as the story goes, as the snake oil story goes, it's one of the most popular stories in the history of evil. Is that a person suddenly made a connection to something and realized they were God. Not even Moses did that. Not even Moses was able to do that, because Moses had to go twice. Not once, twice. First time maintenance, second time I am that I am, custodial. Now when people start speaking about I am this and I am that, and in the same breath suggest that they're God, what it's saying is the highest connection that they're able to achieve in their life, or that's being granted to them, the highest connection that's granted to them is 5. The level of amber, for those who have the reference, the 5th level in the chakra system, the 5th level in everything. 5. I am. Because if they were to say I am that I am, that would be God speaking to the human being. At OPAL, I over I equals I. Balance, equation, equilibrium, harmony, oneness, righteousness, I over I equals I, itinually. Doesn't drop down, it's ridiculous. Why would something struggling, working on themselves, in themselves, with it, in a you-it combination, why would something struggling to maintain a you-it combination just let go of that combination, disconnect that from that combination, to go down to a place of 7, 6 and 5, which then it's impossible to return to? How can a person at 7, 6 and 5 connect or reconnect, as they suggest, to 1, 2 and 3? So all they can do is reflect what they receive from 1, 2 and 3 as their own, which is what the moon does in relation to the sun. Now you see, it's so sad that so many people didn't take the time to give themselves a chance to get it, to dig what's being mooted here. Because if they could dig what's being mooted here, they'd realize, number one, whatever God is cannot be connected to if a person's mind is as far away as God as chalk is from cheese, because you can't connect to it. That's the reason why people don't like to talk about the semi-conscious, because the semi-conscious is the vanguard and the denial of all that lives beneath it and all that lives above it. It is the vanguard of what is to come if a person passes through the 4th domain. When a person says I am, doesn't matter what they call themselves, what can they do and what is the level of their being? Because if it's higher than 4, then they'll pass through. But if they're not higher than 4, well then, they're going to get burnt. And they'll turn back on themselves knowing that they are never going to connect to what it is they're talking about. Because they can't. A person cannot connect to anything higher than 5 if their center of gravity in life is 6. And I put another way, because a person should have got this, but at this point realize it's not really about one person, because first of all, it's understanding what's so easy to be seen because it's so crude, like Bishop. But realize this is genetic modification gone haywire. Now see that, how can this possibly be about any one person when it's understood from such a high, universally principled understanding? Realize now it's about the spiritual dilemma of the human race. To not address something living at 5, 4 and 7 from, at the very least, a center of gravity of 4, will mean that to go down into 5, there's a possibility one goes into 6. And if a person's centre of gravity now moves down from wherever it was to a centre of gravity of 6, because it's so much invested in what's taking place at 7, and for those that understand what this means, it's talking about now things have been split and polarised into positive and negative. And anybody that's so polarising themselves, so splitting themselves between positive and negative, it can only be because they're so low in themselves where that's the outcome, that's what's taking place. It's what takes place in the domain of planets. The only domain lower than the planet is the moon. And so what this is saying is, when people in their life use their 5 senses, and rather than focus on things that are dealing in 1, 2, and 3 of the 7 options available to them, something about cultural experience has brought the whole cultural experience of life down, and the mind boggles of what human life, so-called human life, might have been like if it was as a centre of gravity living at the 2nd level of the astral light of the planet. The mind boggles. This is a question that a person has to ask if they want to be part of it. They have to ask, what must it be like to be living consciously at the 3rd level of the astral light, or even better, the 2nd level of the astral light? And imagine if a person is conscious in the 1st level of the astral light, well then, they're semi-conscious of the domain immediately above them, which is the 7th level of a higher domain. And if they're conscious of the 1st domain, it means that not only are they semi-conscious of the domain immediately above them, which is the 7th domain, but now they're unconscious in the 6th domain. So at the very least, when they sleep, they're drawing from a domain that's not even part of planetary experience. Therefore, that makes it new if they can remember what they experienced when they were sleeping and give it definition when they wake up. It's got to be new. What can a person produce that's new or divine when the highest they can reach in their own experience is the 5th level? Because their sense of gravity is cultural, or worse still, their centre of gravity is at 7, the moon, where all they do is just suck and absorb from life every day. The worm. This is logistic. If a person tries to dodge this one, then it only goes to highlight the level of what they're able to conceive and what they're able to then perceive, translate and give definition to, which is just more confusion. But anybody that can see this, then realize the only reason you're going to be able to see it is because now you're asking the question, what kind of human race is this? What's the nature of it? What's the nature of your own experience? Do you have enough time to readdress it? Because you see, if a person accumulates because of where they're living in their experience within the planet, at the very least, a centre of gravity at 2. If a person's living there, it means they're unconscious at 1, but it also means they're conscious at 3. Well, the question is, what can it mean if a person's living their life physically, but their experience of life is at 1, 2, and 3? Well, it means they're seeing much more of what's taking place principally than everybody else. That's all it means. At the very least, they're seeing and understanding, they're conceiving and they're perceiving, they're conceiving and perceiving what's taking place in their life at the more conductive realms, the causative realms, rather than those people that have a divided perception to do with positive and negative. And so anyone that really begins to understand what's being said there, in this particular experience of your life, you're perceiving an understanding that's philosophical until proven fact to do with, despite human beings looking the same, their experience of life is vastly different, but the vast majority of human beings are living down the bar. And this is the logistic for it. This is the universally principled logistic for it. Now, of course, we're speaking about something called the ray of creation. We're speaking about the astral light. We're speaking about the aura, all at the same time, because the same principle applies. But a graphic explanation of just what the occult is that's living in these 7 levels is if one imagines that the ray of creation is like the breath of an unseen God. It's the physical result of an action of God, which was to breathe. Now, when God breathed out, I realized the very first thing about this is that God then is not a man or a woman. For God to breathe out, it means the source of God is something that lives in a different octave. The source of God is not physical. The source of God is something unseen. The source of God lives in a different octave to its own breath. Now, when a person breathes out, they don't say, that's me. Each time a person breathes out, they don't overly identify with their breath and try to keep it because they're breathing their life away. No. When stuff comes in, stuff comes out. So the breath is a result of something new higher up the bar coming in. Thus, the breath is no longer God. But as has already been explained, despite the breath of God not being any more connected to God, it's the fruit, it's the creation, it's no longer connected. Inside of the breath are particles of breath, atoms of breath, ions of breath, energy of breath that still remains connected to God. Surrounded by all kinds of other stuff. And that's the reason why these things surround these conscious particles of God's breath, is because they're more conductive than their surroundings. So the human, their conductive nature then gives rise to electromagnetic and finally magnetic. It's the law of 3, the law of 7 in everything. So simply put, try and understand then that by way of analogy, an unseen entity called God, the government, the order and the dominion of steam, the void that steam comes out from, the government, the order and the dominion of steam, not part of steam itself, breathed out, and in doing so, particles of the entity of God remained amidst the steam. And that's the consciousness of the human being. And its first experience external to God as steam, but still connected to God, was so close to God it could talk to God. Because steam, when it first leaves the mouth, you can hardly see it. It's still vapor. It's more like energy than physical. So when steam leaves the mouth of God, the void of God, that's neither masculine, feminine or neutral, because it's a void, it's unseen, it lives in a different octave, it's unknown. It's unknown to its creation. But still, because there's particles within this steam that remain connected, there's something amidst the steam that remains conscious of itself and driven to reconnect to that which it has been departed from. It's unknown. And so, in the very early beginnings of the appearance of steam, it's still at a frequency very close to the breath of God that hasn't been expended yet, that hasn't been expelled yet, that's still part within the body of God. It's still part of it. It's not hydrogen, it's not oxygen, it's not gas, it's still unassembled. It's not fixed yet. But as it becomes more fixed, it gets to the dispatch and appears in another lower octave as steam, and this steam has within it the consciousness of humanity at a very high level, because it's so close to God that it can feel the presence of the Creator. It can still feel the presence of the Creator. It's that close, because at 1. Then it cools a bit more, still steam, but now at 2, the consciousness of the spiritual free radical found within the steam was conscious of the steam, semi-conscious of the Creator, and unconscious of the Creator. As the conscious spiritual free radical then moved down into the second government, order and domain of steam, well, at this point, the spiritually conscious free radical is conscious of the second domain of steam, the first domain of steam, which are both to do with creation and physical, and then the 7th domain of the higher octave, which is to do with the Creator, that's unseen, not physical. So, by logistic, what this then suggests is, each time the steam cooled from steam into water at 4, suggesting that if 4 is the midway point now, 4 is the semi-conscious, conscious at 5, semi-conscious at 4, unconscious at 3. They can be conscious at 5 and conscious at 4, or they can be conscious at 4 and conscious at 3, but they can never be conscious at 3 and conscious at 5 at the same time. That's impossible, because those two can't meet. The interlocutor, meaning the person responsible for passing the messages from one to the other, is at 4, the soul. And remember, there has to be enough power in the soul to bring about higher connective opportunities in the higher emotion and the higher sexual, to be able to make that leap into the next domain. It has to come from the person. It has to come from what they've aggregated in themselves, what they built in themselves, the potency. And when a person is spending all their days having sex, physical sex, every day, eating, sleeping, going to the washroom and having sex, that's all they ever do, it's a very high indication that they're not in a position to control the lower aspects of themselves found at 7, 6 and 5, which are green in nature, the sexual aspects of nature, but perversely found at 7, 6 and 5. They're not able to control the green nature of themselves in the 5 system, which has been somehow magnetically pulled down along with the yellow system into 7, 6 and 5. But because it's been pulled down, magnetized, 7 governs 6 and 5, because 7 is what's holding it there. So 7 is the God of 6 and 5, because 7 holds 6 and 5 there through its magnetic power. If you can dig what I'm moving to, you know what I mean? Look, this is the type of logistic that if you can see what's being said, if a person can actually really see, and it's so simple, but that's one of the reasons why people have a difficult time, because they're taught that science has to be complicated, but science is a definition of the science of inner development. Science is outer development. That's why it's more complicated, under more laws. But the higher the science, the more simple the laws. Therefore, now we understand the value of principle, which is the blue. Because the principles is to do the laws. So the first episode in this trilogy was to do with the principles, understanding the principle, the blueprint. Now, how many people really understood that, apart from very few that have been following this work for a while, that if it's the blueprint, it's got to be to do with the instinct, and if I can understand this, I don't even need to listen to the other, whatever's coming. I don't even need to listen to it. Because if you understand the principle, you apply the principle to your knowledge and your reference, and because you know how to think, you can then decide what to think. And take that understanding or that assessment, which once they hear the word assessment, people living at 7, they run from the fear that the assessment might actually expose them for not who they are, but what they are, and actually where they are in reality, which is to do with what? The unseen worlds. That's the reality. So the reality is, no matter what a person says, where are they connected? And you can only tell where a person's connected to by assessing, in the first instance, what they cannot do, and in the second instance, what they are not able to regeneratively maintain. What they do and what they say, because the broader the contradiction, the lower they must be. And one of the biggest contradictions then, which is the whole point of this, having established why blue is to do with principle. So it runs in two ways. There are going to be people heading down the bar, and they haven't got the patience, they haven't got the control of their mind or the self-discipline to face something new, something they've never heard before, a style that they're not used to listening to, or a voice they're not used to listening to, or even an accent. Or perhaps I'm a man and they like listening to women, or perhaps I'm a woman and they like listening to men. All of these likes and dislikes, good, bads. Oh, he's white? What colour is he? Who was his teacher? All of this business, you see? What it does for a person heading down the bar, rapidly heading down the bar, one might say, is that they're able to ignore so much, because life really falls into what's positive, which means everything they want, everything they love, everything that confirms them, and what's negative, everything that makes them uncomfortable, that they're afraid of, that makes them angry. You see? So when a person says, well, the reason why my life is the way it is because of this system over here on my left, the only reason they can say that is because they've retreated to the 7th level from the 6th level, the level of the moon. From there they can contradict themselves as much as they like, from the dark side to the light side, from the forgive me, the system damaged me excuse, to the I am a God of creation. They can go from light to dark because they're at 7. And when you catch them out, the highest they can go is 6, and talk about, well, you know, I made a mistake, but God says forgive me. This is the rhetoric. This is the rhetoric. Where have we heard this before? From Jimmy Swaggart to Judas. I mean, look, it's nothing new. It's nothing new. But realize this type of behavior is the behavior of the worm. And the highest they can go in themselves is 6, because their center of gravity is 7. Their actual center of gravity, where they live on a constant basis, is in a place where they've disconnected themselves from themselves by living at 7. And their behavior is the epitome of negation. It's the epitome of negation. They see through one eye, and that one eye sees light and dark, myopic. They can only see one thing in one way, and it's either beauty or the beast. It's either light or dark. It's the living contradiction. The living contradiction. The beast. Man that has become beast. It's a contradiction, because man is supposed to live at 1, 2, and 3. And if a person openly confesses to their followers that they lived a life of perversity, on so many levels perverse, willingly, which means already that they're living at 7, you see, for 10 years, which is more than one cycle, because a cycle's 9. So a cycle plus 1 plus 0, a full cycle of 9 plus 1. So this now means it's engraved. It's engraved. It's something that's alive in them. Why? Because In order to have this type of influence in them, engraved in them, it would have needed to have happened early in life, prior to puberty, for it to be engraved. Because engravings take place in a person's life, no matter who they are. No matter who they are. There's another indelible principle, which was referred to in the blueprint, in understanding why people are the way they are. It's much bigger than any one person, because there's so many people in the world today, unfortunately, that from the minute they're born, they're engraved with a type of experience which almost shocks them into retreating down to the 7th level of the moon. And their life there is a life of pleasure or pain. It's extremely contradictory. Love and hate. This is the moon level experience. Now, if that happens, even before the person's born, because it wasn't born naturally due to crack, the contradiction lived prior to, if it happened because the mother bearing that child allowed herself to not only lose a connection physically by taking drugs, but then have the lower emotions, including the lower sexuality that accompanies the emotion, to connect so far down the bar that they were taking crack cocaine whilst pregnant. This is the type of mental behavior. This is the type of human connection that can only cause a person to behave this way because they're possessed by something that will make them do that, that can only live down the bar where the extremes live. 7, 6 and 5. So when a person asks themselves, what came over me? Why did I do that? I lost my mind. To what? And where did you lose it? To 7, 6 and 5. Because most of the time people are living at 5, 4 and 3. 5 is where they're conscious. 4 is where they're semi-conscious. And 3 is where they're unconscious, which is where they go when they sleep. 3. Now, on the other hand, if a person goes to sleep at 4, where every human being naturally goes to sleep because something in the planet triggers sleep or poses sleep upon the consciousness of the human being, and that's how energy is exchanged. So it has to happen. But given that to one side, because the human deal with the planet is to exchange energy during sleep, that has to start at 4, the midpoint, the ruby point, the point of exchange. And if a person's conscious at 4, when they go to sleep, they'll be semi-conscious at 3, and then unconscious at 2, where anything is possible. However, there's also now something that needs to be addressed, which is not really useful in this work. So the idea is to know this, but not think it. To know this, but do not think this, because it's only going to be mentioned once, and that is, clearly, when a person goes to sleep at 4, which is the natural point of transition into sleep, 4, if they're connected down the bar, then in terms of the unseen worlds, they will travel then to be semi-conscious of 5, a place the mind should not go, a place the soul should not go, and then conscious at 6. Now, if a person's astral life is at the same consciousness or has the same center of gravity as their carnal life, or if a person's character has the same nature as their carnal life, in other words, they have a carnal mind as well as a carnal body, when they go to sleep, everything returns to the source of its arising. So the first soul that they've been given, the planetary soul that needs to be charged up by the planet, has been somehow modified or slowed down so that no planetary connection is really being sustained, or a very small amount of planetary connections being sustained, because the soul's been drawn down because of the mind that's connected down the bar to a place where the two can't meet, the two can't really connect. No matter what they do, they can't connect. It's impossible. And so the point is, person is semi-conscious of what's above them and therefore also semi-conscious of what's beneath them. When a person goes to sleep at night, if their mind travels down instead of up, not only is their immune system threatened, but worse still, they can't sleep because of night terrors. And this type of person will stay up nights on end talking to themselves, trying to avoid dealing with the knowledge that they are in actual fact condemned. They cannot face themselves when they go to sleep. And of course then, to understand how evolution works. But how can a person even claim to be representing anything but the antithesis of what divinity is, what righteousness is, what God is? How can a person even proclaim something as blasphemous when the laws clearly state it is entirely impossible? And from their own mouth, it was said that they lived a life from birth. And so the question is, has it become clear when it is said, there will be many who will come in my name? Not even OPAL frequencies is coming in anybody's name. It's coming in the name of OPAL. But for someone to suggest that they are God incarnate, whilst living in a physical body, with the mind of God, and anything else as asinine, is for a person to have continued to be clinically insane. Because if they know anything about the laws and the principles therein, they would realize that as the breath of creation continues to cool, from steam into water at 4, into ice at 5, 6, and 7, if this is the breath of creation, according to the story of creation itself, that God breathed out as it cooled, how can someone living at 6 be connected to what lives at 1? How can any human being, for that matter, talk about connecting to God, the absolute cause, which lives at the very least a center of gravity of 2? So how can any mortal being, when speaking about God in the fullest extent of the terms, that being the absolute cause, I am that I am, how can a person possibly suggest that, knowing what's known now, if they're living on the planet, which is, by way of analogy, in the domain of ice? It's a domain of ice. The planet is found at 6, the moon is found at 7, the sun is found at 5. The stars are found at 4. The absolute cause is found at 1, which then emerges into the void of that which is unknown and unknown about. But some of us, a small portion that actually do know that it exists, because it has to follow the logistic of universal principled laws. There has to be an octave existing in the unknown unknown. It's just that the content of the occult, living within the astral light of the unknown unknown, is yet to be written by the spiritually free radical particle that sublimates itself into the astral light of the new domain. And that is one of the ways that it works. But either way, whether it's the human moving up in their mind from planetary concerns to concerns on the scope or the objectivity of the sun, to a mind and a mentality connected, by way of analogy, on the scope and the expansive nature of the stars, a universal citizen. Now, how can a person's whole religious dogma, pseudo-religious universal dogma, who no matter who they are, they come into your life and they say, look, I represent God for black people, you know, they're telling you the truth. But if they then go on to talk about God in terms of the absolute cause of all things, living in the very throat of God itself, and they're talking about black people, which only appear so low down the bar that God's not even conscious of it. He's just hoping that it will return. And how's it going to return if it's divided itself into identifying with the idea of the knowledge of good and evil, dark and light, white and black, man and woman, separation, polarity along the bar of contradiction, to do with facts, rather than resolving it with that one fact, that one indelible fact that was established previously. If a person established that one fact in themselves, how can they not then pursue it? It's principled, it's going to lead somewhere. And this is the difference between the utter garbage in the name of the New Age spirituality and the great tradition that this life was fortunate enough to be led into, connected to. But realize, what does that really mean when the human being is located at the level of the earth in terms of steam, cooling vapors? This is an icy place. The spiritual free radical that is man can conserve its energy by raising its standards, not dropping its standards, raising its standards, going in on itself, and thus making a higher emotional connection, a higher sexual connection, which warms the element or heats the element of the life itself. Thus it sublimates. And sublimation brings about a finer level of intelligence, a finer level of sensitivity, but more importantly, it's going to bring about new experience. Because think about something that's lived this whole life in the icy realms of creation, and then suddenly its mind is able to connect, it is able to incarnate into a realm and a dimension of experience that is not like the restriction of so many laws that the moon or the planet, or for that matter even the sun, experiences, because it's now at a level joining the stars, which is under 12 laws, free, much like something becoming steam, in the mind, in the understanding, in the perception, in the principled knowledge, rather than the type of knowledge found at 7, which separates things, locates things physically, restricts things, dominates things, magnetizes things, and sees things as either this or that, positive or negative. But what it really is the light and the dark side of the moon and the reflection of the sun, which is really solar power appearing at the level of the moon, which translates then as intensified lunar power. That's why a full moon is so powerful, because it's moon level magnetic power, and it remains magnetic power, but it's heightened because it's powered by the sun. And the question is, I wonder what would happen to certain people who lose their minds every full moon if the moon got any closer. It's a good question, but remember where you heard it first. These types of people become very dangerous when they become overpowered by their own god, which is the moon. And they assume that everything stays the same, but this is not so. So it'd be rather interesting what they'll do if the power of the moon became even more powerful than it already is. Some people can hardly control themselves as it is now. It's a waste of time chasing people who are chasing their own tail, because there's so much more important things to do. And so in this first trilogy, which spoke about the blueprint, what is being said about that is, if a person had done the work, they would have immediately seen what was being mooted to, and then having listened to the consequent red print, where the principled reasoning that the principles themselves sit upon was touched upon in an opening way, because these things go everywhere, but in an opening way were sufficiently touched upon to support the initially presented principles themselves, because the principle has to be presented first. Because if the principle is not understood, how can one evaluate the reasoning? And if the principles are indelible, which in this case they certainly are, it then suggests that it applies to everything and everyone, because it's divine principle, universal principle. Not that the person using it is divine, but certainly the understanding is. Thus, what we see is principles being upheld, in this case by principled reasoning, which again was the second edition, or the second part of this trilogy. The point being made now, as was made earlier, how many people survived? They didn't survive. They didn't survive. And the reason why they didn't survive is because their mind could not rise to the occasion. What does that say about anyone who, if somebody listening to this presented it to them in their own words, so what do you think about this? I'm not saying I agree with what this is saying, it's philosophical until proven fact, but what do you say about these three things, like what this understanding is mooting towards? Like, what do you say about it? You know, some people will not even understand the principle. They will not be able to understand their principle. I mean, if a person doesn't even mention the semi-conscious, how on earth can they understand a principle that doesn't incorporate one side or the other, but incorporates a higher understanding to do with custodial, maintenance and expendable? It's a superior level of understanding because it's far closer to the principle itself. Duality is an apparent opposite, in other words, an illusion. The hidden is the unseen. Therefore, there's the seen, that which opposes the unseen, or the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis, if a person wants to get technical. And talking about technical, listen, if a person's mind was truly connected to 1, 2, and 3, and they were divine, then it doesn't matter who they are, whether they're black, white, yellow, red, or brown. If a person's mind is connected with a center of gravity at 2, then they're going to be another Mozart, another Tesla, another unnamed or unknown black scientist, which is a tragedy, because they're humans from all parts of the world that brought forth tremendous insights which were stolen by the culture, because a person has to be principled in their nature and has to have certain characteristics and essential qualities to be able to even connect at 1, 2, and 3, and their work is the vanguard of what is to come. So for a person who can't even guarantee themselves to not belch in public or eat with their mouth closed, is going to suggest that they're connected to or have a center of gravity at 2 and cannot converse amongst themselves, or for that matter, cannot enrich the scientific world, the artistic world, the world of inner development with any new or profound connective principled understandings, is a tragedy in itself that people actually listen to them, or worse still, devote their lives to such people. And let's say this again, the world is full of these people. The world is full of people who resonate at 7, believe it or not. They are evil people because they seek to manipulate other people's lives. It's evil. That's evil. And they are the steam that comes to rest as moisture with dirt in it. It's moisture held together with dirt. They're about as far away from the lungs of the Creator than the absolute cause is from the moon. It's rather strange that people give themselves away so easily when, for those that have the eyes to see, it's so clear. And that's what makes it strange, because strange means occult. Strange, the word strange means occult, unseen. It's rather strange, it's rather occult, it's rather unseen worlds. Understanding why a person will behave like that. Strange. Now, these are the facts. All of these facts are just, they're facts, right? But the fact that needs to be made, because opal frequencies has got much more important things to do, but when a person takes Leo's work and uses that work to manipulate other people's lives or bring lives into the world to suffer, well then there has to be something lodged within the astral light to counterbalance such abhorrent behavior. When you understand what one's responsibility is, you realize you've got to leave something in a finer state than you found it. And thus, there is a self-sustained, self-evoked, needing to go on stance in my life, to not allow someone to just stroll up in my business and steal Leo's work and use it to control the lives of others. I don't care whether they're black, white, yellow, brown, it doesn't matter. It's a no-no. It's not good. Human beings were not designed to be controlled by other human beings. The first people to do that were the Egyptians. And if a person wants to listen to something and even get one sentence and it helps them, and they take that sentence and they run with it, that's the whole idea. No one's seeking credit, no one's seeking subscriptions, no one's seeking donations, no one's seeking accolades, and certainly no one's seeking names. That's why it's called opal frequencies and not somebody. It's in the world. But the one thing that cannot be allowed is for people to take this work, take Leo's work, and use it, and then go around talking about white people in the same breath when the understandings were stolen from a white man, whether it be Leo or whether it be Lipton or whether it be the scientists that put forward the quantum theory, which is the platform of Bishop's whole religion, and yet he can't converse with these people about it. It's a sham. But worse still is Leo's work. It can't happen. No. You're not going to take Leo's work and control other people. And so this is a stance. This is what taking a stance is about. And the reason why it's taken so long is because the blue of it was the first part of the trilogy. The red of it was the second part of the trilogy. And these are the facts. And anybody that doesn't understand these facts, it's because as the blue, the red and the white explains, they cannot understand because they cannot. They don't connect that far. They cannot understand because they cannot connect to something that lives too far away from them. They can't pick it up. And if a person cannot understand something, whether it be on the scale of repairing an engine to building a nuclear reactor, it's all about an understanding of scale. The specialists live at the top, and the people that maintain the building and clean the washrooms, etc., are just as important, but they live at the bottom. Their knowledge of a nuclear reactor is far greater than a person that doesn't work in one, but it's the knowledge of a janitor. It's the knowledge of a person living on the ground floor. And when they go home and tell their girlfriend, well, listen, I run the nuclear reactor, well, that's a lie, because they don't. They're the janitor, you see? And if you ask them a few questions about how the nuclear reactor runs and how it operates, its safety procedures, its specifications, they start telling you, you know, you're from Babylon or you're a devil, or they start telling you you're trying to put them down or you're trying to embarrass them. And if you keep holding them down to the principal things, then they're going to blame the system for making them the way they are, and that they should be forgiven. Well, how can you forgive something that locates itself at 7? It's evil. It's evil. And it doesn't control people physically by its physical location. It's magnetic. So it has a field of influence. And nobody wants that field of influence to be traveling anywhere around the world. So this is the reason for this particular part of the trilogy, because whether anybody hears it or not, it's in the world. It's in the world. I've done my part. This is a principled opposition of the blue, the red and the white as to why I stand against this type of essence being in the world. I stand against it. It doesn't matter who watches this. It doesn't matter who subscribes, who likes it, who doesn't like it, who comments, who doesn't comment. When a person says, well, listen, I'm on Instagram, so who am I affecting? I'm not in your community. You're listening to the devil himself, because he knows full well that he has a great influence upon people. Otherwise, they would not be watching him. They would not be interviewing him. They would not be commenting about him. They would make their point, red, white, and blue, and disconnect. And whoever stays and doesn't hear, well, then you know what? They must feel. But how dare anybody take Leo's work, because these are desperate times, and desperate time call for desperate measures. And so in making some of Leo's work available, and in making my own life available to the internet, along comes some worm and takes fragments of this work and uses it to control people. When I asked him to stop, he was rude. He was rude. How dare you? So now it's not about you, and it's not about anybody else like him, because there's billions of generic, not genetic, generic male organisms like Bishop. Generic male organism. Generic male organism. Not a man, certainly not a gentleman, and definitely not a king or a hierophant, which is a priest king. He's certainly not that. He's not a hierophant. What is Bishop? Bishop lives at 7. He's a beast. He's not even a man. He's a beast. Because man is supposed to live at its lowest experience in the planet, not be magnetically controlled by the moon. So let's have it then. Let's have it. Whenever a person is living their life, and it's going to happen more and more, the influence of Bishop and entities like it are influencing young children to such an extent through everything from video games to music to pseudo-spiritual demonism. And the unseen world is very subtle, just like air. Easily to cool, easily to become ice, easily to change the condition of just cold air. Walk into a room-sized fridge. Walk into a room-sized cold storage tomorrow if you can, and notice how quickly your instinct retreats from the situation. There's a reason why the creation story speaks about breath, ether, because things cool. Creation stories talking about the ray of creation, and the Adam and Eve stories talking about the spiritual free radical within. In a moment of being open to the magnetic quality of their life at 1, 2, and 3, they let something in called a snake, and the magnetic quality of the snake was intellectually powerful enough to confuse them, and they lowered their center of gravity, which was at 2, I over I equals I, to 4, and then from 4 to 6. This is how creation cools naturally, but it's also the story of the fall of the conscious particle within the creation story that is now located within the ray of creation at 6. That being the planet. But within the planet itself, it has its own astral light of 7 that are connected in the same way, on the same frequency, by way of tuning thought principle to the ray of creation. 1 in that sense is connected to the 1 in the ray of creation, and 7 is connected to 7 in terms of the moon. So when a human being is in the lowest part of their mind, being 7, 6, and 5, they're connecting not only to the expendable part of their mind in terms of the law of 7, but also the expendable part of their mind in terms of the law of three. It's irrevocably expendable. It's fixed. It's not going anywhere. And if a person such as Bishop openly tells his followers that, look, I was in such a low place, having been born a crack baby, and then ultimately become so sexually confused that I took on a perverse alternative lifestyle that I sustained for 10 years with no break in this downward spiral, no break at all. Within that young child's mind, they're irrevocably scarred or engraved with the entities found at 7, because that was the source of their abuse. It was 7, so that becomes their God. Even through puberty, it becomes stronger. It becomes stronger. The early part of their life, irrevocably engraved with abuse, sexual, emotional, physical, mental, therefore scarring the soul, scarring the perception of the 5 powers of the soul. In what way, one asks, were the 5 powers of the soul in the early childhood of Bishop scarred? Well, they were scarred in the sense of a disconnection from 1, 2, and 3, and 4, which was natural in a child, to 7, 6, and 5, which happens in many children today. And that's the point of using principal facts. That's a fact. So if one understands the principal fact, and then understands the principled reasoning, one arrives back at the principled understanding of why Bishop is nothing more than the product of perversity, which lives at 7. Because it was perversity that exposed him to those horrendous conditions in the first place. And how a person disconnected from the planet as early as his childhood, so his center of gravity is at 7, meaning that what he's conscious of and what he's semi-conscious of is the same thing. And that's the reason why he speaks about 50%. And I'll say that again. You see, when a person lives at the level of the moon, there is no duality. There is no duality, because it's just darkness and light. And the darkness doesn't come from the life of rotation. See, because the planet rotates, there's duality. But because the moon doesn't rotate, there's only ever one side that people living on the planet can ever see. Because the moon doesn't rotate. So it has to invent duality. And the only way it can invent duality is saying, well, look, sometimes you can see me and sometimes you can't. But that's not really duality. That's some kind of bogus business, because the moon's light is not really light. This is the contradiction. When the moon says, okay, look, can't see me now, but in a moment you're going to see my light, this is a lie. The moon is always dark. The moon is always dark. And there's a dark side you never see. So that's the dark side you got to worry about, because when the sun hits the moon, it's the dark side of the moon that gets powered. The moon gets brighter, but the dark side gets slower. That's why people dip into their emotions, because when the sun hits the moon and the moon then projects itself into the planet, it's drawing high power. And it's drawing from the humans. It's had everything else. It's had all the beasts of the field. It's now drawing from the lower emotions and sexuality of the human. That is why a human cannot accumulate enough power to then break out of its present circumstances and connect to 1, 2, and 3, which then allows it to be divine in the real way. Divine, connect to the divine of the person's life. 1, 2, and 3, the numbers of divinity. This is not really so much about anybody hearing this. This is about putting the signal out into the world and being responsible for putting that signal out, because I was responsible for putting Leo's work out there. And for have someone take Leo's work and misuse it, well, the responsibility lies with me, because I was the one that made it available in the first place. So this is the signal to break up the magnetic influence insofar as Leo's work is concerned, and how it was misrepresented. And now It's time to make that point, that indelible point. Now you see, a lot of people will say they woke up in the morning having lived a life of utter evil, perversity, debauchery, and complete contradiction, doing every obscene thing that the mind could possibly conceive because of how dark it is. And one day they wake up and they realize that one of the ways they can make money, they've just seen this, is by abusing the knowledge, because you see, they would have spent time with a lot of very intelligent people who have money. And one of the things about intelligent people who have money, they know how to be ruthless and they know how to manipulate people, because it's all about power, profit and promotion. So that the lower a person sinks, the closer they get to the moon, but actually in a way they almost become more intelligent about life and how to control, manipulate and destroy other people. It's like a very effective parasite living in the mind of other people, connected to a personality. It's a parasite. But what happens is, certain experiences, you know, they meet with people who have a lot of money and want something kinky, and so there's almost like a trade-off. Like a person might work in a church and be responsible for a congregation of maybe 7,000-8,000 people, but he's living a lifestyle that's so low and degenerate and perverse that when he speaks, the person that he's being degenerate and perverse with is learning a lot about how to manipulate people, intelligent people that is, decent people, religious people, so-called religious people, out of their money. See, this is the same man now with someone who shares his alternative lifestyle, but the reality is, if the principles of 1, masculine, 2, feminine, and 3, neutral, is what a person goes by, then any other lifestyle other than masculine and feminine is perverse. And the only way they can do it is to ignore 1, 2, and 3. You see? So that's why they're living at 7, 6, and 5. So they can make it up as they go along and follow their own laws and do what they will, which is what Bishop does. When a person lives a life that's so utterly perverse, and that they receive all kinds of abuse all the way through their life, continually, from 9 to 18 to 27 to 36. Suddenly, they melt down. You see, there's a meltdown. Creation melts the person down, and when they melt them down, they give them an opportunity to right themselves. But when a person's lived the type of lifestyle that some people have lived, where their center of gravity is at 7, when they get melted down, the most they can connect to is the planet. That's the most they can actually connect to. You see, their center of gravity is at 7. What's beneath them in terms of what they're conscious of, that's unimaginable. So it's warped, it's neurotic, it doesn't make sense, because what they're conscious of is beneath 7. That's why it's spoken about as a sunken place and all this business. It's because the lowest you can go is the moon. There's nothing under the moon. The moon is the magnetic point. It's the drain, the reservoir of creation. And realize that if a person tells a story where they say they was in such a low place in themselves, in the moon in themselves, where they had to reconnect to the planet, now that means in themselves as an aura, their connection was not at 3, 4, and 5, which is the level of the planet, in the human being themselves, in the person themselves. You see? The human being is like a mini planet, and its aura has a scale of 1 to 7, and what Bishop and people like him experience at certain times, which is called a meltdown, is their whole assembly melts down. It's one of the natural points called a midlife crisis, where men and women, they melt down. But when they melt down, they're able to reform based on where they are and the direction they're heading. The more magnetic they were prior to the meltdown, the less chance they're going to have of being able to connect high up and taking advantage of the opportunity to reconnect to something high that disconnected from them because they became too low for it to stay with. So the only way they're going to reconnect is if it's high enough for them to allow it to live with them. This is the principle. High things attend, low things possess. Bishop and nasty people like Bishop cannot the connect of something high. That's impossible. Ice cannot become steam. Steam has to heat up ice. Bishop can't suddenly connect to the sun just because he wants to. He's got to connect to the planet first. But the human is designed to be connected to the planet all the time. Now let's say that again. The human is designed to be connected to the planet 5, 4 and 3 naturally all the time. That's the only way they can stay connected, even at an unconscious level, to divinity. Divinity appears at 1, 2 and 3. 3 is the common denominator. 3 is the common denominator. The law of 3 is the common denominator. If the human is living at 4, that means they're semi-conscious at 4, conscious at 5, and unconscious when they go to sleep at night at 3, which means that at least, at the very least, when a person goes to sleep, some portion of them reconnects to divinity at its lowest level, 3. But at least they're connecting, which is why they're able to remain conscious, that is, able to have new thought. It doesn't mean they're having new thoughts. It doesn't mean they bring back new thoughts when they wake up. But what it means is the connection remains there. But if a person lowers their standards by doing things that defy natural law, such as, and specifically, certain alternative lifestyles, simply because the human being has every right to do that doesn't mean principled and moral based on universal law of 1, 2 and 3. 1 being masculine, 2 being feminine and 3 being neutral. If a person's living their life on those high principles, they cannot exercise any type of action or alternative lifestyle that contradicts this natural law without sinning against the spirit or the trilogy of 1, 2 and 3. They go against the spirit. And if you go against the spirit, you disconnect from the planet and end up being drawn into the moon. Now from the moon, 7, 6 and 5, now you have this or that at its extreme. You have masculine that's really feminine, you have feminine that's really masculine, you have combinations therein, none of which is good or bad viewed from above, but merely the effects of what is excreted, the remnants, the cooling of something till eventually it becomes so arrested that it becomes nothing more than dead skin, nothing more than a layer of dead skin. That's what the level 7 is. And this is a basic understanding of the principles of the ray of creation and the evolution of the spiritually conscious free radical within, which takes work. And when a person doesn't work, well then of course they become subject to the natural degenerative processes of magnetism, just like the skin of an orange. The very suggestion, as ridiculous as it now clearly appears to be, that a person can live their life in such a perverse way that they actually disconnect from the natural influences of the planet. They have no conscience then. Now you see, this is a word a lot of people, they run away from. I've said this before and I'll say it again. A lot of people run away from talking about, explaining the importance of conscience, having a conscience. Because if they start explaining what it is to have a conscience, people will identify them as being a very, very dangerous and magnetically negative person once they understand what a conscience is. Because the question, how can you possibly do that, or how could you have done that? Well, when people ask you this question over and over and over again, what they're really saying is, don't you have a conscience? See, the more a person is asked this question, how could you do that to me? How could you say that about me? They're so hurt and they don't understand, because they could never do it, and they never really imagine anybody doing that to them, anybody doing that at all. When somebody lives their life constantly being asked this question, it's because they have no conscience. And Bishop has no conscience, and people like Bishop who seek to manipulate people or steal high work and make it low, this because they have no conscience. Because if they had a conscience, they couldn't do it. They just could not do it. They cannot do it. Topaz can't do it, you see. By the same token, I cannot not make a stance about such people in the world, because they're everywhere. They're everywhere. Everywhere. And they're very, very much connected to Egypt, these people. You'll see it. Don't take my word for it. Just observe. It keeps on turning up, these people with no conscience. They don't care about the human race because the expendable portion of Egyptians that came here did not care about the human race. They sought to control it as demigods. And they were as black as coal, dark, 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 condensed astral matter. The very first Egyptians that came in and controlled the human race. The Egyptians were all dark from 1 down to 7, but the portion that took it upon themselves to become demigods and try to usurp and redirect the spiritual free radicalism of the human being, well, that was unfortunately the Egyptian pharaohs, the ones that enslaved the 12 constellations of the stars, the tribes, the constellations. And so when a person claims to be a specialist in astrology, but their mind and their conduct is not even connected anywhere close to the stars, but it's more connected to the moon, well, how dare they tell others what to do when, look, the reason why it's said you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Now, there's a reason why that's said. And that now there's duality in what's being said there. In the low, it's saying you can lead a horse to water, but if the horse is as stubborn as a mule, no matter how much you explain, they're not going to get it. That's 5, 6, and 7. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink, because if you do, the horse will kick you, make noises to distract you, move around so you can't focus. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink in its lower expression, not its good or bad expression, side to side, east, west. In its lower expression, you're talking about Bishop, you know? You can lead a horse to water, all this knowledge that supposedly people spend nights overnight, avoiding the night terrors because of the transgression of their ways that they don't want to face when they go to bed at night and have nightmares. So what they do is they stay up and they live in the internet. They live in the imaginary world of the internet, from porn to black progress. You see? And that's 7, 6, and 5 right there. You see, that's right. That's it right there. So, how can a person that spent their whole life living in that portion of life suddenly decide to tell other people? Because you see, as it's been said, you can certainly lead a horse to water, and there's many, many horses that have been led to water throughout the histrionic of the human race. Many, many people, many races have been led to water and they refuse to drink. And so the first understanding is that they can ignore, or they're stubborn, or they're obdurate, or they simply cannot connect to the knowledge to understand enough to embody it, to take it in. So they don't drink it. They can't absorb it. 5, 6, and 7. But the other understanding of you can lead a horse to water but you can't make it drink is you cannot force a person to understand something, or force a dogma upon someone, or manipulate a mind so that they appear to understand the knowledge, but what's really going on is they're simply afraid, angry, and confused. Afraid, angry, and confused. Confusion is their God. Because confusion is the myopic nature of the thing they're following. Sees one view and that view split in two. That's confusion. Because that's unnatural. One view out of one eye, but the eye split in two, black and white, like the moon. You see? That's confusion. You can't get more confusing than that. And every now and again it shines the sun on people that are confused, and they become more confused because all that's happening is the empowerment of confusion. The magnetic power of polarity to do with the moon Do they like it? Do they not like it? Well, they do something they like, even though they know it's not good for them because they like it so much. That's where their emotion went. And they spend their emotion contradicting themselves, and then spend more emotion rationalizing the contradiction, so they've got nothing left at the end of the day. And that goes everywhere. But I digress, because the point is, it's better to be a small thing, getting smaller on your way up, than a big thing on the way down. For something to say that the reason why it's a demigod and divine and all this is because it disconnected from the planet as a child. Through their own words, they lived such a horrendous life that they instinctually disconnected from the planet, which means the emotions and the sexuality have been drawn down into the lower order state of affairs. The semi-conscious is redirecting all the energy back down because of the warp, because of the damage from childbirth. And then this person has a meltdown, and when they have a meltdown, they have an opportunity to connect. So, of course, the person tries to connect, but in the semi-conscious, it's been programmed to redirect its energy back down. So the person goes into invention and reflects the downward energy, mistaking the reflection of the moon in themselves for the magnitude of the stars above. Because that's where the human is designed to be connected to, the stars, not the sun. But how can the person even connect to the sun when they can't even get off the planet? The first job of every human being is to resist the magnetic pull of the moon. The second obligation of every human being is to honor the mother, the planet. And the third obligation of the human being is to rise above the sun and rejoin the custodial nature of the stars. And if a person doesn't know that, why on earth are they even attempting to cast other people's horoscopes when astrology is to do with the stars? The best they can connect to is the moon in themselves. It's impossible to have disconnected from the moon and then connect to the sun. You can't reach that far. The moon can't reach the sun. The planet can reach the sun. And by Bishop's own admission, he volunteered the fact in his religious awakening, no less, where his conscious is in his higher self telling his story, that he disconnected from the moon and then connected to the planet and then connected to the sun. No. Can't be done. Can't be done. Can't be done. The planet is at 4. The highest you can connect to the planet is 5. But you're living at 7, and the highest you can connect to is 6. So you didn't connect to anything but yourself. And that's why people who are connected to themselves, that's why they love themselves so much. Can't stop saying, I love myself, I love myself. You see, even the blind can see if they take the time to listen to the explanation. Even the blind can see if they take their time to just try and figure out what's being said. Just take their time. Take a day off from the fast food downloads of a snake oil salesman like Bishop and get your teeth into something that you've got to take a few days to chew over. You know what I mean? You might get some real nutrition out of it, because guess what? It's conductive. It's conductive. High nutrition for the mind, food for the mind. So, yeah, in closing then, yes, because as it's been said, life is not about talking about these things. The only reason it has to be done is to take a stance. As it's been said once, it's going to be said again. Doesn't really matter if anybody listens to this. It's been broadcast into the astral light because this life has a responsibility to do so and cannot not. But insofar as anybody that wishes to take this work, they're free to do so. Yes, this work is available for anyone that wants to reach the higher heights and share what they have learned about their own life, what they have discovered through the enjoyment of working on their own life. Free to reconnect to the vine of their own life, in their way and style, following the principles of creation, not governed, not ordered, and certainly not dominated by the likes of anyone else, but that which is directly above them in the vine of their journey. But when all is said and done, there's much more important things to deal with, so at this point, over and out.
Out of the samba. This is the time to